we want to talk about planning, and particularly as it relates to fund development. So planning, to be effective at raising money, you have to do a variety of types of planning. Organizations do strategic plans or long-range plans, which help chart the direction that the organization's going, and they also help inform what the case for support ends up being. So that's one type of planning, and that's usually done with the board, with staff, and oftentimes with people outside the governance. And it may be members, it may be people from outside who bring new perspectives. So strategic planning is one piece of the planning equation. The next type of planning is operational planning or annual planning, looking at how do we take that strategic plan and what do we need to do in any given year in order to move forward with that plan. And that planning development is very much part of, and the fundraising plan fits into that. So some nuances about planning, I guess. So I want to really talk about the fund development plan, the fundraising plan, and what all goes into that. I think the first question you need to really look at is who needs to be involved in creating that. So I've talked about with the strategic plan, it's the board, it's the staff, the executive staff at the very least, and then possibly people from outside the organization. The annual plan tends to be insiders. It tends to be management staff. And the fundraising plan tends to be the development staff, putting that together, but with outsiders again, with the board, with volunteers that are engaged in helping to execute the plan, helping to raise the funds that are necessary to achieve the operational objectives and ultimately the strategic plan. So that group, that team, the development staff, and the key volunteers, usually board members, that are involved, need to do a few things. Pretty early on, one of the things that needs to happen is the old SWOT analysis, looking at what's working really well for our organization right now when it comes to fundraising, what has been very successful for us, what kind of results did we generate last year from the annual fund, from major gifts, from planned gifts, from if there are any corporate giving or sponsorships, from foundation giving or grants. What seemed to work really well? Did we achieve the objectives we set for last year? Did we exceed them? Did we fall short? Did we have the volunteer base that we needed to execute on the plan? So what really worked well? And then we need to look at the flip side of that. It's the rare organization that everything works well 100% of the time. So what are some things that maybe didn't work so well, and why not? Maybe you think of the terrible tragedy of 9/11. Maybe it was some sort of external factor that you had no control over that had a major negative impact on your results in some aspect of what you were doing. Could be that. Maybe you didn't have the buy-in to the case. Maybe you hadn't done enough good work in involving volunteers in putting together the case for support and in helping you execute on the plan. Maybe there are other things that didn't work. Maybe it was the actual appeal you made. Maybe the way you were asking didn't work for the donors that you were trying to appeal to. Maybe you were sending an email or instead of a letter, or a letter instead of a personal visit. So what worked well and what didn't work well, and having not just yourself doing that, having your team really help do that assessment gives a very well-rounded perspective, particularly if that team includes volunteers. Then you need to look at what are the opportunities that really we perhaps ought to be exploring going forward. What kinds of things could we do in terms of growing support? in different areas. So if the annual fund raised, I don't know, $25,000 last year, and we think that that was really great, maybe it was a growth over the previous year. Do we see that growth continuing? Are there some new ways that we could be asking people that would help that growth over time? So what kind of opportunities are presented? Sometimes it's a whole new giving initiative. A lot of organizations have had a very successful annual fund, clicking along and raising, an upward amount of money over time. And they look and say, who's been giving for at a consistent level over a number of years? Maybe that group of people we could approach in a different way, we could engage in a different way, and ask them for a larger gift. So what's the opportunity for upgraded gifts? What's the opportunity for, if we don't have any kind of major giving opportunity, what's the opportunity for developing a major gifts program or expanding a major gifts program? And that, again, having not just yourself doing this, but your team brainstorming and really thinking through those opportunities, it can be very helpful to look at what the possibilities ought to be. You'll need to be asking, how are we going to execute on that? What would it take in order to execute the plans that we're dreaming up now? Do we need to invest some money? Maybe if we're starting a whole new strategy, maybe we need to invest some money that's not going to pay immediate results. Maybe we need to make an investment, not just grow the budget. That could be a database system. It could be maybe hiring an additional staff person. So a major investment that we might need to make. So what is it going to take to execute on the plan? Do we have the volunteer capacity to execute on the plan? What kinds of new ways might we need to engage volunteers or expand the pool of volunteers that is helping with it? So who needs to be involved in doing that? What's it going to cost? What kinds of longer-term investments might we need to make? We need to also pay attention to the threats that might be confronting the development program. Are there some things going on in the external environment that we need to pay attention to, negative trends? And one of those for us would be the overall decline in giving to religion. So what's going on in the larger society that we maybe need to be aware of, and as we're then thinking about opportunities and how we respond to it, take that into consideration in our planning. So we now have some ideas of what's worked, what hasn't worked, maybe what we ought to be doing next year, what it might cost us to do that, maybe some investments we need to make next year that are going to have a longer term return. And in terms of budgeting, which is the next piece of this planning, you're going to have to put together a budget. What's it going to cost? And what are you going to bring in as a result of that investment? What kind of money are you going to raise through the annual fund, through the major gifts program, through foundation gifts, through corporate gifts? All of that then rolls up into what actually is the development plan for the coming year. The development plan, as we said in the beginning, is part of a larger plan, the operational plan for the year, the business plan for the year. And so when the development thinking and planning is done usually concurrently with the other units of the organization, you get into a master budget overall. And in my experience, probably you have bigger dreams on the program side than you have revenue coming in. So there usually is some kind of reconciling process that somebody's going to say, can't you raise more money? And you'll have to look very carefully, I think, at whether that's possible or not. If you've got a good plan in place that's well thought through, you ought to be able to assess that. So in summary, I think in order to be successful at raising money, you need to know where you're going. And so you have to have that strategic plan in place because it informs the case for support. And the case for support in any given year that's part of that annual operational planning, that case needs to be revisited every year so that we can assess what's worked, what hasn't worked, maybe how the case needs to be retooled so that we can get the people, the resources, and the strategies in place to engage donors again and keep developing relationships that will be mutually beneficial over a long period of time.